This scarf dress is comfortable and stylish and makes a great last-minute wedding guest dress or date outfit. The best part about it is that it can be made in under 3 hours. The first step is to fold the front bust piece in half, wrong sides together, and pin together the sides. Turn your sewing machine stitch length up so that it's larger than normal. Leave a 3-inch thread tail at the beginning and stitch the sides of the bust piece together at 3/8 of an inch using a straight stitch. Leave a 3-inch thread tail at the end. Tie the thread tails together on one end. Next, pull the thread tails on the other end until the side matches the length to the first notch on the dress front pattern piece. I'm making a size extra small, so the length is 3 1/8 of an inch. Tie the thread tails to secure them, then stitch over them again using a zigzag stitch to further secure the side. Your zigzag stitch should look more like the one on the top than the one on the bottom because it will allow for more stretch in the fabric. Repeat these steps on the other side. Next, lay down the dress front main fabric piece, face side up, and pin the bust piece to the front of the dress. Make sure that the fold of the bust is directed towards the bottom of the dress so you have the raw edges of the bust piece and the dress front at the top of the dress. The bust piece should end at the first notch on the side of the dress. I'm pinning at the sides and at the center front notch, and I'm adding a couple of extra pins in between so that it's easier for me to sew them together. Now stitch the bust to the front where you just pinned using a 3/8 inch seam allowance and a zigzag stitch. When you're done, it should look like this. Now we're moving on to the scarf piece. I'm folding the long sides together with face sides together, and then I'm pinning them matching the center notch. Serge or zigzag the long sides of the scarf piece together at a 1/2 inch. Now flip the tube that you just made so that the face sides are towards the outside. Next, you'll fold in the sides of the scarf at the notches closest to the outside. After that, you'll create 2 pleats in the center until the end of the scarf is 1 3/4 of an inch wide. Now I'm doing the same thing on the other side. Secure the folds with a 3/8 inch zigzag stitch on both ends. Lay out your main fabric back piece, face side up, and pin the scarf end between the side notches. The side of the strap where you can see the folded edges is going to be on the inside of the dress, so make sure that it is facing upwards when you pin it to the back. Once pinned, it should look like this. Stitch the scarf ends to the dress back at 3/8 of an inch using a zigzag stitch. Next, lay down the main fabric back piece right side up and lay the front piece on top. Pin the front piece to the back piece, face sides together, matching side seam notches. I pulled the scarf out from between the front and back pieces so that it doesn't get caught in any of the seams. Serge or zigzag stitch together at the sides at 1/2 inch. Now lay the lining front and back pieces on top of each other, face sides together. Serge or zigzag stitch the side seams together at 1/2 inch. Now, with the lining inside out and the main fabric right side out, place the main fabric inside of the lining. Match the front notches and pin them. Pin at the side seams with the main fabric seam facing towards the back and the lining seam facing towards the front. This will help to reduce bulk. Here I'm adding some more pins at the front. The scarf will stay down between the layers of fabric. Pin together at the back notches. Serge or zigzag stitch where you just pinned at 1/2 inch. If you're using a serger, overlap the first inch of serging at the end and then run off the edge of the fabric. Secure the stitching by cutting and using a sealant like fray check, or thread the end through a needle and thread it through the previous serger stitching. If you're using a sewing machine, back tack at the beginning and the end to secure the stitch line. Now we're moving on to the elastic. For this step, you can use a serger or a zigzag stitch on a sewing machine. This chart shows how long your elastic should be based on the size and method you're using. Serge or sew the ends of your elastic together at 3/8 inch. Mark the halfway point on your elastic. Pin the ends of the elastic to the center back notch of the top of the dress seam allowance that you just sewed. Pin the halfway point of the elastic to the center front notch on the dress seam allowance. Then, evenly distribute the elastic and pin it to the rest of the dress seam allowance. Now, stitch the elastic to the seam allowance using your serger or a zigzag stitch. If you're using a serger, make sure to turn off the cutting knife before you start serging. You'll have to stretch the elastic slightly to match the fabric length, but make sure not to stretch it too much. Securely finish the end of the stitching. At this point, you can try on the dress and see where you would like the hem to land. Knits tend to ride up, so cut the hem longer than you think you need and make sure to account for the 5/8 inch seam allowance. There are 2 ways that you can finish the hem, one using a serger and one using a sewing machine. For the lining, I'm going to show you a rolled hem, which requires a serger. For the main fabric, I'm going to show you how to finish the hem using a sewing machine zigzag stitch. You can use either technique for either the lining or the main fabric hem. Now we're going to finish the lining hem. I first set my serger to the rolled hem setting, and then I'm just stitching all the way around the hem of the lining. I trimmed my hem a 1/2 inch beforehand since I'm not going to be turning the hem up. If you're using a rolled hem, you can either trim the hem a 1/2 inch beforehand like I did, or you can trim it as you serge. I overlap 1 inch when I get to the beginning of my stitching, run the stitch off of the fabric, trim the serger tails, and then use fray check or another sealant to seal the end of the serger tails. Here I'm going to show you how to finish the hem using a sewing machine and soft stretch fusible adhesive. The fusible adhesive is optional, but it's recommended for keeping the hem looking nice. First, I'm fusing the adhesive to the hem on the inside of the fabric. Put your iron on the synthetic setting, since too much heat can melt the elastic in your fabric. And make sure that your side seam allowances are pressed towards the back of the dress. Once the adhesive is fused to the hem, peel the paper off of the back side of the adhesive. Next, flip the hem up to the edge of the adhesive, which is 5/8 of an inch. Then press that down using the iron. If you don't feel like the hem is completely secure, I recommend adding pins before sewing to ensure that the hem doesn't get warped. Sew the hem with a zigzag stitch at 1/2 inch. Back tack at the beginning and the end. Now you're all finished. I hope that you love your dress.